Welcome. You're watching the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar, and we have a power-packed show lined up for you this Friday evening. On the show today, I speak with Arvind Virmani on the economy on a day that Finance Minister has recapped all her reforms, but are they really working? We then look at why India routinely tops charts of the country with the most internet shutdowns. Shutdowns are on right now in Kashmir, parts of the northeast, and Aligarh and Saharanpur. Is it the only way to quell violence? Watch our deep dive. Also on the show, we look at the diplomatic fallout of the CAB with Bangladesh seeming miffed, Shinzo Abe postponing his visit, and the US State Department putting out a statement that we should really be thinking about, saying that they hope India lives up to its democratic values. We will also be joined on the show ahead by Lord Meghnad Desai, breaking down the reasons behind the overwhelming support Boris Johnson has got in the election. So all of that up for you. But first, the top story. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman held a press conference today to essentially recap the reforms carried out by her this year and the impact so far. Nirmala Sitharaman, who incidentally has found herself on the Forbes list of 100 most powerful women in the world today at number 34, honestly didn't give away much. Not on a possible hike of GST rates, or what further measures could be taken, or whether fiscal deficit targets could be breached. Not even on a possible GDP number. The overall message was, we are doing what it takes and are waiting for the effect of our measures to show. But have these reforms actually worked? Speaking to us today on the state of economy is Arvind Virmani, a top economist, of course, and chairman of EGROW. Mr. Virmani, thank you so much for speaking with us on India Development Debate. Your first word, really, on the situation the Finance Ministry and the Finance Minister finds themselves in currently. The economic slowdown is the biggest conversation point. We're wondering whether we are in a growth recession. Are we facing stagflation? To start off, do you think there should be a clearer explanation, communication and response from official quarters on where we actually stand?
Well, we have to remember that this slowdown has really caught, I would say, 90% of the public and even the experts by surprise. So there is a certain amount of confusion which is valid. But of course, there's no doubt that the government should not be adding to the confusion and should really be helping to clarify it. But that said, the growth really, I've just done some analysis of past slowdowns, and really what I'm saying is based on this analysis. And what we find is the previous slowdown, which occurred in 2015 or so, the first four quarters were exactly identical to the current one. But then in the previous case, there was a V-shaped recovery, and in the current case, we kept going down, and it seems quite likely from all the data which is presently available that this would be a kind of U-shaped recovery. So that's really the first point about where we are. We are clearly, or not clearly, but it seems like from the monthly data that the economy probably bottomed out in October, and therefore the current quarter data will probably show an uptick over the previous quarter. However, that doesn't mean that everything is rosy and fine, and the real issue which actually confronts the government is that how quickly one can restore growth, in my view, back to the 7.5% level. So that's the overall picture.
Well, then let's come to those policies. We heard a very detailed sort of, year-long recap, and not even year-long. I would say it started from July or mid-July, really, post, the budget and the nerves that brought on. So, say in the last 6 months or so, there have been a slew of measures. The government has been at pains to say that we've done X, Y, Z. But is it really working? That's the big question. They don't seem to be showing the impact so far. Are we going to see a delayed response? And what are these policy measures that you are referring to?
Yeah, so first let's take off from the Finance Minister's press conference. I think there was an impression that there was too much listing. You know, I think in the previous press conference it was said that 50 different measures had been announced, and this is where your question about clarity is relevant. I think what the today's press conference tried to do was to give a little more clarity on this slew of measures, and what I get is that basically the focus has been on two issues. One is to inject spending or funds into the economy, which the CA linked to the consumption part. I think that's very important. The way I would put it is slightly different. I think this acceleration of payments is an ideal way to provide a boost to the economy in terms of slowing down the decline, and I think it will have the desired effects. But you're quite right. Right now we cannot judge whether these accelerated payments have all been made and what exactly the effect is, but I have little doubt that there would be a positive effect. The second part of it was that trying to unclog the credit channels, and here the CA linked that to the investment part of it, but I think the key problem there is that the NPA problem with PSPs and the NBFC crisis has resulted in a what I like to call clogging of the channels, and those have to be cleared. But before you can do that, you have to stop the spiral. You know, we know from historical experience in many countries over decades or hundreds of years or 100 years, is that when you get into this downward spiral of credit decline, GDP decline, etc., right, you have to break out of it. So I think it's useful that all these 3 or 4 things which he reiterated, they are important in stopping the downward spiral, but then you got to make sure that you get out of it and go on the upswing. That requires certain other policy measures.
Well, the other point though is where's the money, and the finance minister was asked repeatedly about the fiscal deficit. She of course said we'll wait for the RE numbers in a couple of weeks, but there is a broad sense, and a lot of people are saying this, that forget the fiscal deficit targets for now. You need to spend more. We need to spend our way out of this. Do you see the willingness to do that, or is there still this need to stick to those targets, because those are promises that have been made and reiterated?
Right. Yeah, a very good question and a complicated one, if you'll give me 2 minutes, because I have a slightly different view from my own experience. My experience is that the capital markets will recognize that there is need for a one-time boost to the economy. What they want for the longer term is that the trend of fiscal deficit declines should not be disturbed. So the question of good policy or fiscal policy is how to combine these two things, and basically that is why I was in favor of this quick payments, because your overall fundamental deficit doesn't change. You're just bringing forward the payments, so you get a current boost. Now there are 2 other policies which can have similar effects. One is the direct tax code. When you reform the system, you can look forward, the credit markets will see that revenues in the future will increase because of this simpler, more efficient direct tax code. But right now you can take a little bit of a hit to provide a boost. So the principle which I apply in looking for policies to do both is this balance. GST simplification, even if it has some temporary disruptions, will have huge medium long term benefits in raising the elasticity of returns, which the complex GST system has not been able to do. In fact, it's had a reverse effect. So I think that's the trick. I think there is no harm in having an increase in the fiscal deficit which arises from short term effects of long term changes which will actually reduce the fiscal deficit.
Well, since you spoke about GST and the big buzz, again, a question raised in the press conference is that will there be a consideration of some sort of hikes in GST rates? Would it be a good idea at this time when demand is already so subdued, when consumption demand is already so subdued?
So, again, let me put it this way. I think if the idea is just to raise revenue by changing rates randomly, it's a terrible idea. However, if it is part of a system which says, okay, we want to be at 15% or whatever rate is chosen, which is thought to be revenue neutral, and we'll raise every rate below it towards 15, and we will only raise a few rates down to or lower down to 15, then you are moving to a system which is good in the long term, then it's good. But as I said before, if you are just randomly raising rates at that time, it's bad. So it all depends on how you construct. That's why the reform part is absolutely critical. It is not the actual whether the deficit is even 3%. I mean, it's the deficit. You know, in my view, if even if the deficit is 5%, if we can convince the credit markets that most of this increase is, for example, automatic stabilizers. That's a well-known thing which we used deliberately in the global financial crisis. That is, we know when the nominal GDP growth declines, the tax revenues go down and the fiscal deficit increases. That is a perfectly acceptable thing when you can show that it is rising from a decline in GDP growth. It is not acceptable if you do a whole lot of wasteful expenditures. Okay? So you have to distinguish between these things, and it all has to do with the credibility with the capital markets. Just arbitrarily asserting something will not do, but if you can make a rational argument, I think there is no harm if the fiscal deficit goes up, and it's a lot of good if it is part of a tax reform which will actually raise more revenues in the medium long term.
So, you know, last question to you, Mr. Virmani. We have luckily a wealth of intellect, and there have been so many suggestions coming in on what to do with the economy. Of course, you have been giving many as well. The question is the focus there? And now there has been some commentary to suggest that the government of the day, with the massive mandate it enjoys, is focusing its political clout on non-economic issues and sort of ticking off lists perhaps of what they've promised in their manifesto, whether it's 370, now CAB, NRC, etc., etc. Do you think it merits that a little more focus or a lot more focus actually right now, and political heft is put on the economy, on solving things like labor laws, land laws, etc.?
Right. Yeah. So again, another very good question. You know, my experience of 20-30 years in government is that when you are faced with a grim situation and you want to do things which are very complicated, or you want to do reforms, you have to have somebody inside the government who knows the economics and is also trustworthy, because you get a lot of different suggestions. There has to be some weeding out, there has to be a prioritization, and good reforms require that there is somebody inside the government. It doesn't matter if there are 100 people outside who are brilliant. You know, you said I am saying something. It doesn't matter what I say. There has to be decisions are taken within the government, and reforms which I have been associated with or which I have read about in the world, they are successful if there is somebody inside the government who is driving it. So I think in my view that actually without it, there's always a danger that you will do a lot of little things which then eventually you find a year later that they didn't add up to as much as you thought.
Are we in that current situation that you are describing?
Well, I hope not. I think there is attention being given to economic issues. I think if you had asked me this in February or March, I may have said yes, but I think since then there has been a lot of forward movement in terms of understanding what's going on, in terms of opening up to information and knowledge outside it. Right. But I think that third step is probably missing as of now, to have enough or person or persons inside the government who understand and can put things together.
Well fielded, Mr. Virmani. Thank you so much. Couldn't resist putting you on the spot there, but thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Arvind Virmani there with his take on the state of the economy.